All right, hi everyone. Sorry I couldn't be here for a live lesson, but I'm going to record it and put it on Classroom so you guys can hopefully learn as much as we would in a live session. So today's class is on the muscular system. So what exactly is the muscular system? It's defined as an organ system consisting of skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscles. It permits movement of the body, maintains posture, and circulates blood throughout the body. So that's the main purpose of the muscular system, which is movement of the body. And the main components of the muscular system, they're basically just types of muscle. And we discussed this in our second class of histology. The muscular system is made up of smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and skeletal muscles. And the muscular system also closely works with many other systems, such as the nervous system, cardiovascular system, and the skeletal system. So everything is pretty intertwined in the body, but just especially the muscular system is very, very close with a lot of other systems to make your body function like it does. So this is just a review of the types of skeletal muscle in case you need a refresher. So skeletal muscle, it's located, it's attached to the bone. That's why it's called skeletal muscle. And then the appearance is striated. And if you don't remember what that is, it's when the muscle, you can see like little stripes, like little bands. They look like stripes, and that's called striation. And then the control you have over skeletal muscle is voluntary, which means you can move it when you want to. So skeletal muscle is like the muscles on your arms and your legs. Wherever you have bones, you have skeletal muscle. So you can always move them whenever you want them to. Then we have cardiac muscle. It's located inside the heart because cardiac. Um, it's also striated, so it has like the little line bands kind of thing. And the control is involuntary, which means that you can't control it. You can't control when your heart beats and when it doesn't. So that's why it's involuntary. Then we have smooth muscle, which is located in your blood vessels and your digestive tract mainly. It's non-striated, so think of it as smooth muscle. There's really no texture, there's no bands, there's no stripes, it's non-striated, and it's also involuntary because if you think about it, if it's in your blood vessels and digestive tract, you can't really move that. You can't really control how that functions or how you can't move it like you can your arms and legs. So yeah, just a quick review. And these are just some pictures if you needed them. So your skeletal muscle, it's kind of always bunched together, kind of like this. Smooth muscle, like this. And cardiac muscle is kind of like branched out. Yeah, it looks like that. And then here's kind of the striation I was talking about. You can see like these little lines or these bands on the cardiac muscle and the skeletal muscle. And all these like little circles you see here are the nucleus of the cell. So it's pretty cool. All right, the function of muscle is, there's a few functions, so I'm just going to explain them. So the first main function is motion. Your skeletal muscle action, they work to help you do things such as walking and running. So the reason you can, move and do all these actions is because of your skeletal muscles. And it also helps with your muscular system also functions so that you can move substances within your body. So with cardiac muscle, you push blood throughout your body. That's blood is a substance, so movement of substances within the body. One is blood, and then your smooth muscle is peristalsis, sorry, which is the movement of food through your digestive tract. And then your skeletal muscles help circulated blood and lymph. They help circulate stuff. A skeletal muscle does this along with muscle action, so they do a lot. Yeah, so movement of different kinds of substances within the body. Third is posture. So skeletal muscles help you maintain standing or sitting positions. So when you sit in a chair or stand straight upright, that's your skeletal muscles working to make sure you can do that. Fourth is organ volume regulation. Sphincters prevent outflow. Sphincters are kind of like these openings and closings. So you have one in your stomach, for example, your stomach sphincter that either allows or prevents food from coming into the stomach or going out. So it helps with that. Sphincters are kind of like muscles. And then heat production, which your muscles contract and that generates 85% of all your body heat. So that's very important because when you're cold, you have to keep warm. And, you know, when you're really cold, sometimes you'll get goosebumps or you shiver, you shake your teeth chatter. That's your muscles working to try and gain some heat for you. It tries to keep you warm when it knows that your body temperature is dropping. So yeah, muscles are very important. Characteristics of muscle tissue. Last week we talked about the special characteristics of skeletal tissues and bones, but there are some special characteristics of muscle tissue too. So first is excitability, which is basically it's a stimulus trigger that you know, triggers the contraction of a muscle. So that's when maybe you touch a hot pan or something really hot, and that's a stimulus when you touch something hot. It triggers the contraction of a muscle. So it also works with your nervous system. You know, when you touch something hot, you need to pull your hand away. So your muscles and your nerves work together to contract your muscle, and you'll, you know, pull your hand away. Second one is contractility, which is the shortening of muscle tissue. Your muscles can stretch or they can lengthen or shorten, which is kind of cool. Third is extensibility, muscle being stretched without damage, kind of the opposite of contractility. Like I just said, muscle is somewhat flexible. I wouldn't say it's like stretchy like slime, but it can be stretched without damage to a certain extent. But if you do extend it too much, your muscles can stretch or tear or rupture, which is very, very painful. Fourth is elasticity, which is when your muscle tissue returns to its original shape. So imagine, you know, you're lifting weights and then your muscles, you know, they contract, they become shorter, and then you kind of lift the weight and then you put it down, and that's when your muscle tissue returns to its original shape. You know, this kind of goes along with the flexibility thing. Like if it stretches, then it must return to its original shape. So all of these characteristics kind of work together to make your muscles, you know, move and extend and make you able to move around. So this is a structure of the skeletal muscle and more of the anatomy of a skeletal. So basically, I just have a kind of I call it like a big to small kind of thing. So this is like the biggest structure, and then it keeps going littler, littler, littler. Like the muscle tissue can be really kind of cut into small parts. So let me demonstrate what I mean. So this is the whole muscle, like this whole fleshy part right here. That's the tendon, the white part. And then you have a fascicle within the whole muscle. So this is a fascicle. You can see it. It's like one of these like kind of roundish. It's kind of like one of the big structures you see here. Those are fascicles. They're called fascicles. And then we have myofibrils, which are within the fascicle, which is in here. It's one of these little circles. So the big circle and the whole muscle is fascicle, and then the big circles and the fascicles are myofibrils, and then we have myofibril, which is kind of like organelles, like the cell organelles, and then we have the smallest one, which are like myofilaments. So everything's like contained within one another. As you can see, it's the fascicle, and then it gets smaller, and then one of these circles, and then that becomes even smaller than one of these circles, is kind of this. Yeah, it just kind of all contained within each other. There's so many structures within structures. It's kind of like It's like kind of like I don't know if you guys ever like received one of these, but it's like a box, and then inside the box there's a littler box, and then inside that little box is another smaller box, and then the box just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and yeah, it's kind of like that. So structure of the whole muscle continued. Fascicles, like I just said, this is a fascicle, one of these big things within the whole muscle, which is it's a bundle of 10 to 100 individual muscle fibers. So your muscles are made of little fibers, and the fibers give it the muscle its kind of elasticity and the different characteristics I talked about earlier. So groups of fascicles, so multiples of these fascicles make up a whole muscle. And then we have muscle fibers, which are myofibers. They're kind of long cylindrical cells that make up skeletal muscle, and a group of these make up fascicles. So if this is a fascicle, then the myofibers make up the fascicles. And then we have myofibril, which are thread-like organelles that make up muscle fibers. So it's just kind of like the big box and the smaller box and the smaller box and the smaller box. And you can see at the end here, there's even smaller things, and those are myofilaments, which are thin and thick structures that make up a myofibril. So everything is kind of a part of one another. They just keep getting smaller and smaller, and that's what your muscle looks like. So yeah. The skeletal muscle tissue components go as follows. So first we have the fascia, which is a sheet of fibrous connective tissue surrounding muscles. Oh, all of these here, these four terms I have highlighted in bold, they are the coverings. They're the outside kind of layers of muscle. So the fascia is it covers the whole muscle, so it's kind of like an outer coating top of the muscle belly right here. And then we have the epimysium, which covers, oh sorry, the fascia. It surrounds the muscles, but so does the epimysium. The difference between these two is that the fascia is more tough. You know, it's fibrous means tougher. It's harder to, break or stretch. It's connective tissue. So first you got the fascia, and the epimysium is much, much thinner. Epimysium also covers the whole muscle. So it also covers this muscle belly over here. And then we have the perimysium, which covers the fascicles. So it's also a really thin, protective, covering layer that goes outside the fascicles. So this is a fascicle, and the endomysium kind of goes around the whole thing. Then we have the perimysium. Sorry, I just said that. Endomysium that covers the muscle fibers, and the muscle fibers are within the fascicles. So perimysium covers the fascicles, and then if you go a step down, which is the muscle fibers, the myofibers, the endomysium covers it. So each kind of part has a different kind of covering, different protective layer, different covering. So yeah. So remember when I said the muscular system works really closely with the nervous system? This is just a demonstration how. There's something called the neuromuscular junction, and that's when the muscles and the nerves work directly together. So the neuromuscular junction is what happens is there's a stimulation of a muscle contraction. So like the example I brought up before, when you touch like a hot pan, you can't, if you didn't have nerves, you wouldn't even react to it. Nerves make you feel pain and heat and cold and stuff. And your muscles and nerves have to work together to get your hand away from the hot handle before you burn yourself, right? So what happens when you touch that hot pan? So what happens is a nerve impulse from a motor neuron releases acetylcholine, which is a type of neurotransmitter. It's kind of like a chemical thing that makes your muscles react. And it releases acetylcholine, and then it binds acetylcholine receptors on the motor end plate of the muscle. So what I mean by that is that you see This is the neuromuscular junction. That's a picture. These are, if you can see the labels, the acetylcholine receptor sites, they're kind of like these. They're on the bottom here. This is the motor end plate. Motor end plate's always on the kind of bottom. And then we have receptors here. And receptors are kind of the place where acetylcholine molecules or acetylcholine like can bind. That's where they bind. So think of it as like a lock and key thing. If the receptors are the lock and the acetylcholine is the key, they bind like perfectly together. So once they bind to the motor end plate, they bind to the receptors, it triggers a muscular action resulting in muscle contraction. So your muscle contracts, it brings your hand away from the hot pan or the hot handle or whatever. And then that's how your body prevents you from being injured, basically. So when your nerves detect something is wrong, it sends an impulse, and then acetylcholine is released, and then they bind to the receptors, and then it triggers muscular action. So that's how it works. So basically, we need acetylcholine to finish this reaction, this action, because the membrane of the muscle and the axon terminal aren't physically touching. Like you can see here, like there's a gap. So this is the kind of axon terminal, and this is the muscle. There's a big space right here. And without the acetylcholine to bind to the receptors, then there would be no action. You wouldn't be able to take your hand away, you know, it needs something to connect everything together. And that's what the acetylcholine is for. I put this video here. It's from Khan Academy. I think it explains it very good in much more detail than I just did. So if you want to, you know, learn more about the neuromuscular junction, then feel free to watch it. Okay, so now we're going to focus more on the physiology of the muscular system. So there's something called an origin and insertion. They exist for every skeletal muscle. And basically the origin is the attachment of a muscle tendon to a stationary bone. And the insertion is the attachment of the other muscle tendon to the movable bone. So origin, stationary. Insertion, movable. I think of it as kind of like the origin of something, you know, origin usually means like the beginning, the start of something. I think of it as like you don't want to move, like it's stationary because it's the beginning of something. It's, you know, it's beginning. You don't want to move too much. You might, I don't know. I just kind of think of it like that. And then insertion is movable, and origins are usually proximal and insertion is distal. And if you recall from our first class with our directional terms, proximal means closer to the point of attachment, so closer to your shoulder for your arms and closer to your pelvis for your legs, and distal is farther from the point of insertion of a limb. So in this picture, you can see this is the arm. You can see the bone and then the muscle, which is the biceps. And then this is the origin. The muscle attaches to this stationary bone. And then the other side of the muscle attaches to another point on a different bone, and that's the insertion. And if you think about it, when you flex your biceps, you flex your arms, you're moving your forearm up and down, and you see it's attached to the forearm, which is supposed to be the one moving up and down. So that's why that's the insertion. It's attached to the movable bone. The origin, you don't move it when you're flexing your arm. You know, it stays stationary, and that's why this bone would be the origin because it's not moving. So whenever you're trying to determine the origin insertion of a bone, just kind of move that body part around, see how it moves, and the muscle or the bone or the muscle or the part you're not moving, that's the origin. The part that is moving, that's your insertion bone. So if I flex my legs, you can't really flex your legs, but like if I move my leg up and down, my shin would be the insertion because that's the one moving, and my thigh is staying stationary. So my thigh would be the origin and my shin would be the insertion. Okay, so, and then we have the muscle belly, which is the fleshy portion of the muscle between the origin and insertion. So if this is the origin, this is the insertion, this big part, basically the whole muscle is the muscle belly. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It kind of looks like a little belly, little group of muscle. And most muscle belly are found on stationary bones. So as you can see, it's found on the arm bone right here instead of the forearm bone. As you can see here, the tendons tend to be white in color. They're very tough. They're fibrous connective tissue. They're very, very tough. And then the muscle is just muscle, which is red in color because of red blood cells. Most muscles cross only one joint. So this is the joint right here. It's a hinge joint, as we discussed last week. You can see the muscle crosses this one, but it's just one joint. So most muscles cross only one joint. Not all of them do, but just think of, most of them do. So yeah. And then we have, if you're like really looking at this diagram, it kind of helps. They have the proximal and distal. So this is more proximal and then this is more distal. So I think that's pretty helpful. All right, then we're gonna move on to biomechanics of body movement. So bones are like levers and they depend on muscles to create motions against resistance. So have you ever, I don't know if you guys have ever taken a tech class, but when I did in middle school, we had to make levers and, pulley systems, and it was very complicated and stuff, but bones and your muscles, they work like levers. So there's, this is the basics of a lever system. So in a lever, you have a rigid rod that moves about a fixed point called a fulcrum. So the lever is a rigid rod. So like this black line, this black example lever right here, and it moves upon a fixed joint, which is the fulcrum. And it's usually demonstrated by a little triangle. Fulcrum is the fixed point. So you can think of it in terms of your body as the joint. The joint doesn't move. You can move, the joints cause you to move, but you can't move it physically yourself. And so the fulcrum can kind of be anywhere on the lever. It could be, all the way here. It could be in the middle. It could be on the right here. And then we have the resistance, which is the force that opposes movement, which is the bone, if you think of it in terms of the body. So the resistance is usually, here it's demonstrated as the load, but basically the resistance, anything that has like weight. So if you're holding a really heavy weight, that's kind of opposing the movement. It's harder to move your arm because there's such a big force on it. You're trying to move the weight, but it's so heavy that opposes movement. And so the way the body part being acted on or the tension from opposing muscles is the resistance. So it's basically weight, force, you can think of it as, or load. Then we have the effort, which is the muscular contraction that produces movement, which is the muscle. Here it's the red arrow, effort, it's going up. The load and the effort are always going to be opposite directions of each other because they're kind of working against each other. The effort is trying to produce movement, but the load is resisting movement. It's opposing the movement. So they always kind of work opposite of each other. And motion occurs, so you move your arms when the effort, this arrow, exceeds, so it's bigger than the load, which is the resistance. So when you're lifting weights, sometimes you can't lift it, and that's because the load is bigger than your effort. You can't lift it because your muscles aren't, producing enough movement. You're not strong enough to lift it. So yeah, so just think of it, fulcrum is like your joint, resistance is like your bone, and effort is your muscle. So there's 3 classes of levers, actually. We just discussed a basic one right here, but there are 3 classes of levers. So they're pretty self-explanatory. They're first class lever, second class lever, and third class lever, but they're are differences between all of them. So in first class levers, the fulcrum, the fixed point, the joint is between the effort and the resistance. So it's right in the middle. And first class levers are kind of nice. Remember when I said that the effort and the load are kind of always opposite each other? Well, in first class levers, they're kind of on the same side. They kind of balance out the fulcrum, and it operates like a seesaw, as you can see here. So you have it right in the middle, and then there's weight, there's effort coming down, and there's also resistance coming down. It's like a seesaw thing. And something like this in the body would be raising your head, sorry. So if you raise your head, if you tilt your head up, that's like a first class lever. You know, you can do that without much resistance. Yeah. And then we have second class lever, which is when the resistance is between the effort and the fulcrum. So you can see here the fulcrum is all the way on the right, and the resistance is in the middle, and the effort is on the left. And it operates like kind of like a wheelbarrow. You know, you have to lift up half of it to, wheel a wheelbarrow. You have to lift up one of the sides. And an example of a second class lever in your body would be kind of rising up on your toes, like standing on your tippy toes would be a second class lever, which is kind of like a wheelbarrow because you're just lifting one part of your foot up. Yeah. And then we have your third class lever, which is the effort is between your fulcrum and the resistance. So we have the fulcrum on the left this time, the effort's in the middle, and the resistance is on the right. So there's kind of abbreviations. I put them here in parentheses. The EFR, it's effort, fulcrum, resistance. So FER, first class lever, it means that the effort is on the left, as seen here. Fulcrum is in the middle, and your resistance is on the right. And then second class lever, FRE, fulcrum, resistance, effort. Your fulcrum right here, and then resistance is in the middle, and your effort is right here. It doesn't, these little acronyms are kind of used to just show which one's in the middle. So it doesn't really matter if the R and the E are flipped in FER, it just matters that the F is in the middle. So it just matters which one's in the middle. The other two can kind of switch sides if they want to. Yeah, so the load and the effort can switch, the effort and the fulcrum can switch, but the middle one always has to stay in the middle. And third class lever is fulcrum, effort, resistance. So the effort is in the middle, as seen here. So these are muscle group actions. So there's something called an agonist, which is the primary muscle that causes a desired action. It's also called the prime mover because it's the main muscle that is causing your action. So if you want to, raise your hand, a specific muscle will move most of your hand for you. That's the prime mover. Then we have your antagonist, which is a muscle that has an action opposite the agonist. So it's like kind of, as we discussed, the resistance, it opposes movement. So when the agonist contracts, when it gets smaller, when it shortens, the antagonist will stretch. So as one contracts, the other one will do the opposite and stretch. Then there's something called a synergist, which are muscles that aid the agonist, which is the muscle that causes a desired action. They will aid the agonist in its action. So these are kind of like the helper muscles. So here's an example. If you want to move your arm to drink a cup of water, you want to move your arm up, your biceps brachii, which is basically your biceps, that's the prime mover. That's the main muscle you're moving to bring your cup up. And then your brachioradialis is your synergist. It's helping your biceps because if you do this motion right now, you can feel your biceps contracting, and your synergist will also help because it's also going up. And then your antagonist would be something like your, well, in this example, there's really no antagonist. It's a pretty easy movement, but sometimes there will be an antagonist. If you got to think about it, antagonist in like a book or a movie, it means the bad guy, right? So think of the agonist as like the good guy, and the antagonist the bad guy, and it will have an opposite reaction. So there's so many muscles, skeletal muscles in the body, and there is a specific way, scientists, people in the scientific community name skeletal muscles. These are just a few of the factors. So first factor is location. So sometimes skeletal muscles are named because they're in a specific region in the body. So there's a type of muscle called the occipitalis, which is found on your occipital bone, and that's on the kind of back of your head. So, and that's pretty self-explanatory. It's found on the occipital bone, so it's just called the occipitalis. Second factor is direction. Sometimes the orientation of muscle relative to the body line will help a muscle get its name. So there's something called the rectus femoris. That's a muscle on your leg. It's parallel to your femur, which is kind of a body line. So you can see femur, femoris. That's kind of how it got its name. Yeah, it's more difficult to remember than something like occipitalis, but that's just how it's named. Sometimes they're named on size, so the relative size of the muscle will kind of help a muscle get its name sometimes. So gluteus maximus, which is basically your butt, it's the largest gluteal muscle. So maximus means, big, maximum, maximus. It's the biggest gluteal muscle, so gluteus maximus. Sometimes they'll get their name from shape, so the relative shape of the muscle. So for example, trapezius, which is kind of your neck and back area, it's actually a trapezoid shaped muscle on your neck. So trapezius, trapezoid, pretty self-explanatory. Sometimes they're named on their action, like what they do, which is the principal movement of your muscle. So the flexor carpi radialis, which is a muscle in your forearm and connects to your wrist, that flexes the wrist, and flexor flexes, yeah. And sometimes they're named off of really strange things, but that's just how it is. And then sometimes it's named off of number of origins, so the amount of tendon attachments. So your bicep brachia, which are just your biceps, as I showed in a diagram before, they have two attachments, one to your arm bone, and then one to your forearm bone. So there's two attachments, bicep, brachii, and brachii means two. And sometimes they're named based on location of origin and insertions. So, basically, the origin is the stationary bone and the insertion is the movable bone, site of attachment. So there's a muscle called the sternocleidomastoid. That's a mouthful. And it originates, so it's connected to the stationary bone at your sternum or your clavicle. Your sternum is the bone that, connects your ribs together. It's on your chest, and your clavicle is your collarbone, and it inserts at your mastoid process, which is your kind of jaw. And yeah. So we're not going to go over all of these. I just put it here in case you guys wanted to learn the names of all the muscles, which is more, the anatomy part of the class. I don't blame you guys for if you don't want to learn these. I just want to put it here to show you just, how all these muscles like work together to help move all the things you want to move in your body. I'm just going to go over a few of them within the next few slides to show you like the most important ones I think you should know. So here are the face muscles. Oh, also you definitely don't have to memorize all these muscles. There's a ton. Yeah, I'm definitely not going to blame you guys, but just in case you wanted, more information, and I just want you guys to see all of them because there are so many more muscles than, I ever thought there were. So yeah. So first we have the face, and the frontalis is the muscle right here. It's kind of like your forehead, your front. You can actually move your forehead. It raises your eyebrows. So when you want to raise your eyebrows, that's your frontalis. And it also wrinkles your forehead. So you can kind of move it two different ways, and it either raises your eyebrows or wrinkles your forehead. Your orbicularis oculi, which are around your eyes, they help your eyes close when you sleep, and it also blinks for you. So responsible for the opening and closing of your eyes. The orbicularis oris, which is this, it's a ring around your mouth. It goes around the whole mouth, and it's for closing your lips and also for kissing. It's the kissing muscle. Let's skip a few. Oh, the masseter, which is right here, which is like this big muscle right here on the side of your cheek. That's basically your jaw muscle. It controls the closing and opening of your jaw, assists in protraction. Your temporalis, which is right here, the side of your head, it closes and retracts your jaw, so it kind of works with the masseter. If you ever feel yourself chewing and you put your hand on your temporalis, you can literally feel it moving because it helps with chewing. Your buccinators, right here, it maintains your cheek, compresses cheek inward, and it also helps with blowing. So when you want to blow out your candles, that's your buccinators. Here's some pretty wordy ones. The depressor labii inferioris, it depresses your lower lip. So it depresses means, you know, down. It makes your lower lip more downward. And risorius, right here, this little curvy, wavy muscle right here, it draws your mouth laterally. So you can literally draw your mouth in a straight line, and that's your risorius. I know some people can't really do this, but the risorius doesn't quite work the way they want it to, but you are able to do it to some extent. So maybe try it out. All right, next we got some leg muscles. The main ones I want to point out are the quadriceps. So, you know, your quadriceps are probably the biggest group of muscles you have. The scientific name is quadriceps femoris. It's made up of 4 different muscles which perform leg extension at the knee. And the 4 muscles are rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and vastus intermedius. I think your quadriceps are very important to know. Yeah, I really liked to know them. So, you know, that's your rectus femoris. That's the one in the middle. That's the big one right on top. The vastus lateralis is on the outside of that. The vastus medialis is this one right here, even though it's pointing to the other leg. It's right here. And the vastus intermedius, sorry, it's actually, you kind of have to cut the rectus femoris in half to even see the vastus intermedius. It's like really in there. I think another fun one is the sartorius. I mean, I think of Jacob Sartorius, but it's not named after him. It's kind of like this big muscle that kind of goes like crisscross right here. It goes from the hip to the inside of the leg, so it kind of wraps around. I think that one's a really cool one. That flexes the leg at the knee, and also helps with hip rotation. And then we have your hamstrings, which are on the back of your legs, not pictured in this picture, but your hamstrings are 3 muscles, very powerful muscles. They perform leg flexion at knee and extends your thigh at your hip, and those 3 muscles are the biceps femoris, the semitendinosus, and the semimembranosus. And those are on the back. Yeah, I think those are the most important ones. Here's some lower leg muscles. I think you guys should really know the gastrocnemius. That's basically your kind of entire calf, like your whole fleshy part on the back of your leg. It's this whole thing right here that flexes your foot and flexes like at the knee. I think it's pretty important. Your soleus. Your soleus is right here, and that plantar flexes your foot. A lot of these are really small muscles that I don't think you'll ever really need to know, but just remember the gastrocnemius. I think that's the most important one. Here are the abdominal muscles. There's not a lot because they're all kind of connected to each other. So we have the linea alba, which isn't really a muscle, but it's just kind of like this line. I don't know if you can see its label. It's this straight line down the middle of your abdomen, and it's really tough. It's like a tough fiber span made up of connective tissue. It's really hard. It's really hard to break or cut. Yeah, that's kind of like the midline. The rectus abdominis, it kind of flexes your vertebral column and compresses your internal organs. Then you have your external oblique, which rotates and flexes your vertebral column and compresses internal organs. So they kind of work together. This is your external oblique. It's kind of like your the sides of your abdomen. So if this is like the middle part, they're the sides, and the internal oblique is just the layer below the external oblique. The rectus abdominis is basically your abs, the whole middle part, and the obliques are the outside parts. So just remember that. These are your arm muscles. The only ones I would really be really concerned about knowing are the biceps brachii, which are your biceps, and then your triceps brachii, which are so your biceps are here, as shown. They're this big muscle right here, and then the triceps brachii are on the other side of your arm. So they're on the back of your arm in this picture right here. So if that's your shoulder, the triceps brachii is directly under it. These are your back muscles. I think we should really, the deltoid is important. That's your shoulder muscle. You can do a lot with your shoulder. You can rotate them. You can move them like back and forth. You can just do a lot with it. Your latissimus dorsi is also very important. That's basically your entire back. It's a huge muscle right here. It's this whole thing right here. And then your trapezius, it's right above your latissimus dorsi. It's kind of the trapezoid shape we were talking about. Here's a picture that kind of raises your shoulder and draws your shoulder blades backwards, scapular shoulder blades. Yeah, I think those are the main important ones. Your pectoralis major, it's not actually a back muscle, it's on the front. It's basically your chest area. So basically your pecs. You might have heard them called pecs informally, but the scientific name is pectoralis major. Those are basically your chest, your pecs, whatever you want to call them. So yeah. That's it for today. I'm gonna put the slides, the recording, of course, on Classroom, but I'm also gonna put a list of all the muscles I kind of went over and what they do in case you wanna learn them on your own time. I doubt you will, but it's just kind of like an extra resource there to help you if you want to learn more. And thanks. Sorry I couldn't be here, but I will see you guys next week for the cardiovascular system. Thanks, guys.